Mayor Walsh is trying to make Boston a national leader in closing the wage gap between men and women. City officials started giving the wage gap their attention under Mayor Menino, and the city's response covers many areas, from its own policies on parental leave to advancing wage equality in the private sector. To bring us up to date is the executive director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, Megan Costello. Thank you very much for being with us, Megan.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Chris. It's great to be here.
Start with the gap in Boston. I mean, how do we stack up against other cities, and how is it spread?
Yeah, so the wage gap is a very complex challenge that is really part of the national conversation right now. And we, the mayor and myself, and the Boston Women's Workforce Council, which is his council, really decided that we needed to focus on what's happening here in Boston. Boston, in terms of the general numbers, right, is a bit better than the national average. So we hear the number 77 cents for the national average or 78 cents for the national average. Here in Boston, it's 83 cents. For our average for what women are making. But that is so different depending on what industry you're in, what company you belong to, and it also really varies depending on your race. So for example, in Boston, Black women on average make 69 cents and Latino women in Boston make 59 cents. So we really saw that we have a responsibility both for the right reasons, right? It's important that women are paid equally on sort of a social responsibility scale, but it's also important to the vitality of the city of Boston. Boston is made up of majority women. Boston graduates women at higher rates than they do men. And so if we are not attracting and retaining the top talent that we have here in Boston, our economy suffers, right? The vitality of our city suffers. If the majority of our population is not being paid equal, are they spending less? Are they not experiencing other things in the city that they might? So the mayor really understands that this is about the right thing to do for women and for families, but it's also important to the vitality of our community.
Well, the larger problem is you've got this untapped or underused potential, and I guess this is a problem that starts even before the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these challenges that women face in society kind of go all the way back to birth, right? And so it's really important, the social constructs, right, that we live in, that we experience, are very important. And that's why the wage gap is so complex, because many people think it's just simply looking at salaries and raising wages. That is such a small percentage of what actually needs to happen. It's much more about the culture of a work environment, of something that where women are every day, right? Like that culture is going to impact women much more than them just kind of getting a pay increase. So do women feel welcomed in the workplace? Do they feel supported in the workplace? Does the company have family-friendly policies that allow for women and men to balance, home lives? So one of the things that we did most recently that I think, contributes to closing the wage gap, but also is a good policy to have, is paid parental leave. So most people wouldn't think that paid parental leave is a way to close the wage gap, but it actually is. When you have policies that are much more family friendly and support working families, we see not only higher retention rates in the workplace, but we see more equity at home. We see less stress. We see higher productivity. So that, in some ways, is a way you can close the wage gap. Here in Boston.
Well, there's a national problem that affects women primarily because if you have a child, you're going to be practically derailed from your career because you don't have that time to, let's say, get started with the child and then come back and pick up where you left off in the workplace.
So that's the perception, right? Many people do think that women are derailed or aren't able to kind of maintain the same level of commitment that their male counterparts might. But I don't actually think
that's... It's not about commitment, it's about what companies will let you do.
To an extent, yes. I think it's also just sort of our bias, right, and our expectations for what women should do when caring for a child compared to men. There's some really interesting data around the flexible work schedules. So that's kind of a big topic of conversation in the workplace right now for wage equity, right? So the idea that you have a set schedule that is a bit more flexible outside of the 9 to 5 range. But the data shows us that when women take advantage of flexible work schedules, they're seen as not committed. But when a man takes flexible work schedules, he's seen as a good father. So, it's very interesting to me, right? The dynamics of that workplace. And I think the biggest thing that employers can do and that we all all as a society can do is be aware of those unconscious bias, right? And be supportive, right? This is really hard because, like I said earlier, you're not just raising wages, you're trying to change a culture, you're trying to change attitudes that have existed for hundreds of years about the perception of who women are and what they can contribute. But I think that there's a lot of untapped talent that we really have, right? Because we're not supporting women in their full potential.
Well, we talk about your role. You work for City of Boston, and this idea comes out, let's have paid parental leave for
Sure.
non-union employees. And I guess, one of the things that goes into the equation, this is going to cost us something up front, so what's the rest of the equation?
So I would actually make the argument that this saves us money. I think when you think about, redoing your roof, right? You have a leaky hole in your roof. You can patch that hole every year, and spend money there, or you can do a whole new roof for $12,000. And that's going to cost you a lot of money up front, but in the long run, you're actually going to save yourself money. And it's similar in the sense of, I don't mean to compare like women to fixing a roof, but it's similar in the sense of this is an investment that the mayor has chosen we need to make in our workforce. This is one of many steps we're going to take. And so by investing in families, by supporting our employees, we're going to retain more employees, we're going to see a happier and healthier workforce, and that's going to lead to increased productivity. That's going to lead to us retaining people, which is one of the biggest costs associated for a company or an organization, is when you have employee turnover. And so it's really hard to know exactly what the figures initially are going to be, right? But it's really important to recognize that this is going to save us money over time.
Well, you're also trying to get companies in the private sector to do more and to look more carefully at what they're doing.
Yeah, it's about education. It's really about being aware of what exists and being intentional about diversity and being intentional about supporting women in the workplace. I think there are so many great examples of companies that are taking steps in the right direction, but we have to recognize there's a lot more work that can be done. Women on boards is a great example. Women in senior leadership, positions within a company. Often women feel like there's only so much room at the table for them. How often do you see, a senior leadership team that's majority men and one or two women, right? Would it be uncomfortable for us as a society to see majority women and one or two men? And these are the types of questions that I think we have to ask ourselves and we have to just be aware of in our everyday lives. This is not going to happen over time. The women's movement has been happening for hundreds of years, right? But we've made progress, and it's important to celebrate that progress, but also recognize that there's some ways that we still have to go.
One other thing going on, we have a project with BU that involves
so the Women's Workforce Council, which is chaired by former Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Murphy and Kathy Minahan, who's the Dean of the Simmons School of Management, we have been working with the Hariri Institute and under Azur's leadership to figure out this very complex data reporting mechanism. So what we're doing that's different than a lot of what's happening around the nation is we've actually got companies that have agreed to report wage data based on gender. That's never been done before. And the reason it's really significant is because we need to know what the numbers are, right? And how we've gotten companies to do it is we've let them know that it's going to be anonymous. So for me, as not a technical person, this sounded like really simple, right? You just fill out, a Google Doc, right? And you send it in. But it's actually much more complicated than that. And obviously companies want to work with a sophisticated system that they trust and is very secure. So we've got some great partners. State Street has been wonderful to us, Mass Mutual and Raytheon. They have agreed to sort of be the testers that are kind of poking and prodding this really sophisticated system that the Hariri Institute is supporting us with. And they're testing it with some fake numbers initially. And then we're going to have the companies, the 55 companies that have signed up, do some reporting. So it'll be interesting.
Well, instead of paying people with the same job title different amounts of money, I think what you're also looking at is how people are reviewed and how people incentivize them. So how do you control that?
It's hard, right? It's not as easy to measure. I mean, I think, again, it goes back to the educational piece and being intentional about it. And so when you have a new job opening in your company, are you intentional about making sure you're reaching out to networks that include women? Are you creating pipelines within your company that are going to eventually help women get up to that leadership level? This doesn't happen overnight. For some companies, the plan is 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it's important important to keep chipping away at it. The easiest thing we can do is to just compare data, right? Is to just compare wages. And that's an important step, and it needs to be done, but it's one of many that need to be taken.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Megan Costello will have more news in just a moment.